Hey, friends, welcome to Wellness Wednesdays. I'm glad that you're here. We are going to have a great conversation tonight, and so I'm glad you're here. As you're coming on in, we love to do two things when we come in. One, chime in where you're living, or excuse me, where you're streaming from, city and state, and then also share this. We're going to really have an important conversation around lament and race and trauma and the intersection of those. And so tonight is going to be a good night. I'm going to take care of some things on my end real quick before we get started and have this conversation. And I'm looking forward to having a really important dialogue tonight on this. So, again, as you're coming in, let us know where you're chiming in from, city and state. And we're going to get this show on the road. Um, I'm excited about our conversation on tonight. And if this is your first time, if you've never been here before, my name is James Perkins. I am a therapist here in North Carolina. And what I do is I help individuals, but I primarily work with leaders, helping them to interrupt cycles of fear, shame, so that they can really step more powerfully into their story and use that as the lens through which they um, really step more powerfully into the work that God has called them to do. I think we all have a unique design, a unique calling and assignment, and all of us are leading somebody somewhere. And so I'm glad that you guys are here with me tonight. Again, we are going to be having a conversation around shame, lament, excuse me, trauma, lament, and race. And so let me do something on my end to make sure we are live. Perfect. Awesome. Perfect. All right, wonderful. So again, as you're coming on in, let us know city and state where you're chiming in from, and also share this with your friends, your network of people who you care about that you think will benefit from this conversation around lament, trauma, and race. This conversation really was an outflow of just the engagement we had on last week as we talked about discerning your purpose in the middle of a pandemic, and the engagement that we got around just this idea of trauma and how trauma really impacts purpose really led us to want to continue this conversation. And so I've brought my special guest and my brother back on again, Garland Dunlap, for our conversation tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and bring him on now, and we're going to have this conversation.
Good
Garland,
evening.
how we doing, brother?
Man, I'm doing well. It's good to see you again. I'm glad to be back on to have this conversation with you.
Man, I'm glad you're here with me. Love you, man. Love the work that you do, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation as well. I'm going to do one thing on my end just to make sure we are live and live and going. Perfect.
Yeah, the fun thing about technology is it's never quite as easy as you think or as it's
Yes.
at least not in the moment. That's my experience of it.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, we are. We are good to go. So, Garland, man, we actually, before I jump into that, if this is your first time meeting me and Garland, we have such a long history together that we can't go over in this broadcast. But he's a dear brother of mine. And on last week, he helped us really get a clear understanding of how we can really discern our purpose in the midst of this pandemic and really for the rest of our life. And he helped to really clear up some terms and give us some fresh language, if you will, for helping us process our life in a way that leads us to step more powerfully into what I believe our unique assignment and calling is. And so, again, my name is James Perkins. This is your first time professional counselor here in North Carolina. And I help leaders interrupt cycles of fear and shame so that they can own their stories and step more powerfully into the work they've been called to do. And really, that's a big synergy around why me and Garland connect so well, is that we love helping people realize potential and help really kind of guide them along that process. So, Garland, I know you introduced yourself last week, but please give us another introduction of who you are and what you do, man.
Absolutely. So my name is Garland Dunlap. I am the Director of Spiritual and Leadership Development at Shoreline Church, which I describe my role as I'm the pipes behind the walls. You don't see a lot of what I do on a Sunday morning, but at the direction and under the leadership of my two wonderful pastors, Erlen Onika McClellan, here in Dallas, Texas. I do a lot of leadership development for leaders, so not only volunteer leaders, but I also do some staff development stuff. A lot of it's more programmatic. One of the things that I also do, almost accidentally, is there's a lot of pastoral care and pastoral counseling that I'm involved in. So, unlike you, James, who comes from a more clinical, and you're a pastor too as well. Yeah. I know actually you preach better than I do. But not just coming from a clinical, but I come from more of a pastoral perspective. So I'm walking through people short term. I'm doing more of the life on life and the discipleship, spiritual formation side of it. So that's kind of the counseling area in which I live.
Perfect. Yeah. Awesome, man. Thank you. So we got a lot of questions and engagement last week around trauma and really around trauma and purpose. And one of the things that we get definitely, if I would have had the opportunity, is really dive more deeply into this whole intersection of trauma and lament and race. I made a comment on Facebook maybe a couple of weeks ago, and I said that it appears that we are actually in two pandemics at the same time. We have the pandemic of COVID-19, the coronavirus, but also this pandemic of injustice, racial injustice, which is, been going on longer than obviously COVID-19, and does not have an expiration date that we know of as of yet. And it was really important because I think we don't oftentimes think about racial or race as a form of trauma, and how that impacts our ability to function and thrive. And so when we're already kind of situated in a season where we have limited mobility, where we can go, who we can, what we can do, and who we can see and how we can engage, compound that with our society's, if you will, inability to stop and reflect, and our need to be busy. When you're taking that away and people are having to sit with their own emotions, their own way of thinking, to be honest, that can be a little stressful, to really have to be forced to go within and not to have an outlet, if you will, to do that. And so you have that part. Go ahead now.
I was just gonna say that, I think what people don't realize, and in some of the conversations I'm having, they're viewing some of this racial tension as, oh, this is a new thing. When the reality is the tension has been there the whole time. I think it's just hit a point in our, if you could call it, collective unconscious, where it's kind of pushed up to the surface.
Yes.
But it's been there the whole time.
Yeah.
And some of the stories that are coming out are 10 years old, 15 years old. They're now hitting the surface.
Yep. And so you have this collective, like I said, you have the pandemic that is, started roughly in March. And then this pre-existing, if you will, condition that we're facing all at the same time. And that can kind of be overwhelming. And the only way that we are able to really process that is if we, take time to reflect. And so I came across a comment that I would love you to respond to by considering him one of my mentors, Pete Scazzaro, and he talks about loss and suffering. Um, and he says this, that loss and suffering must be swallowed and not simply tasted. Loss and suffering must be swallowed and not simply tasted. And I thought that was just like so on point to kind of frame kind of the experience that I think people are having is, we're simply trying to taste it, and sometimes not even intentionally trying to not process our emotions, but just because of life and the demands of life, we haven't had that time to process. And so I remember you sharing with me briefly last week before we started our broadcast about just how that how this kind of is hitting home for you. So I'd love for you to kind of share, give me a little bit of backstory on your own personal experience with that.
Yeah, and I have a trauma story that we probably won't get into tonight. I guess you have to invite me on because that's a whole story in and of itself.
Yes.
But you and I were talking. I was saying how the Monday I had been having this back pain, this lower back pain. It's just been really intense, and to the point where I ended up doing a tele consultation with my doctor, got an anti-inflammatory and a muscle relaxer because it was just that bad. My back was about to go out. But as my wife and I were talking, we started to connect the dots and realizing I've had my back go out a couple of times when she's known me. Mm-hmm. And in each of those instances were times of incredible pressure and stress. And so I started to look and do some reflection, and I realized, man, okay, so when COVID hit, I love my church. We move at Mach 5. So we instantly, made all these changes very rapidly. And I didn't personally get a chance to really process what was happening. Then with George Floyd, and that incident happened, I've said to other people, I was angry for about 3 days. I woke up to sleep angry. And so I finally got to the point where I processed the anger enough where I could be functional again. But in the midst of all that, there's a lot of ministry going on because, again, I'm on staff at a church. So not only am I ministering according to my lane that I'm in, but I'm also getting a lot of phone calls because I do sit in a pastoral counseling space. And so my wife and I are getting a lot of phone calls, helping other people process. Then we're also doing some professional consultation in the sense of talking peer-to-peer, so church leader to church leader, where we're having conversations about this. And I realized just what was happening is I was chewing the grief, but I wasn't swallowing it.
Yeah.
And so for me, it began manifesting in my body as lower back pain.
Man. Yeah, and this goes back to what we were saying last week. Diesel Van Bach, I believe is his name. He talks about the body keeps score and really does a good job in underlying how we embody stress. I know for me, when I am when stress is really high, I tend to try to get really organized on things around our home, like straighten up stuff that I normally don't straighten up, and I'm more easily distracted and can find myself engaging in tasks that I need to do, but just are not a priority because I don't want to give energy to processing what I need to process. And
And thank you, Desiree, for the book title. Desiree,
oh, perfect. Thank you, Desiree. And yes, Bessel van der Kolk. I think I said that right. And so yeah, just being aware of my own unique way that I handled that, I think has really helped me as a Enneagram 9, as a peacemaker, which, you know what, I want to take this moment. It's funny because I believe you've done this. You've been doing these kind of 3-minute ideas, and I saw recently that you did one on the Enneagram. So I think this would be a great segue to talk about that, because I know we all respond to stress and handle our grief and loss differently based off our basic needs for each of our Enneagram types. So love for you to share about that.
Yeah, and so you can obviously go watch the video. I'm not making a plug, but if you can check it out. I did actually 2 videos. I walk through the basics. I walk through the advanced stuff. One of the things I'll say is we are more than numbers on a page. And so I think when you're looking at personality profiles, of which the Enneagram is one, I think it's helpful to the degree that it accurately represents who you are and how you operate.
Yeah.
But I think you're more than that. And so, but I know from my perspective as pastoral counseling, sometimes these are helpful tools to just establish framework, establish language. So here's kind of Enneagram in its basics. The essential idea behind Enneagram is the idea of attachment. And so we all have some events, or usually a few key events that happen to us that change from person to person. We have an emotion about it. There's a base emotion that we have about it, and we do something with that emotion. So whatever emotion you have and what you do with that emotion is what defines your Enneagram. There's 9 numbers, and each 9 represents a particular combination. And so the idea is that the emotion is really your way of dealing with whatever trauma or whatever event happened. It is your way of dealing with the pain that comes from it. So if you are like James, if you're a 9, so if you're an 8, 9, or 1, what happens is whatever the event was, you got angry about it. And so then you either externalize that anger, you internalize the anger, or in the case of the 9, you essentially ignore or avoid the anger.
Yeah.
And so 9s as a typical habit will, hey, everything's fine, we're all fine. They're gonna make peace because they want to diffuse that anger and get rid of it.
Yes, we love internal tranquility.
Exactly, tranquility is the word. Now, when 9s deal with their anger and they deal with it, it's a beautiful thing, because what happens is 9s become the kind of people who enter other people's anger and create peace. They exude peace. They're not just tamping it down, but they're not peacekeeping, but they're actually peacemaking. And that's a beautiful thing when 9s begin to deal with their junk. And that triad, the 8, the 9, the 1, I believe that's. Please correct me if I'm wrong, James. That is the gut.
That's correct.
Okay. So then you have the 2, the 3, and the 4. So what happens with them is whatever event they had, they felt ashamed about it. And so then they either internalize, externalize, or ignore that shame. That is the heart triad. So the 2s become the helpers. So they deal with their shame by being of use to everybody. The 3s deal with their shame by achieving, and so they're going to be the best, or at least they're going to be better than you. And they'll never have to feel that shame again. The 4s feel all the feelings, and essentially they become unique as a way of dealing with their shame. I'm going to deal with my shame by being unique and being different than everybody else. So I typically score as a 5, actually a 5 lean 6 for those who. And so that's in the fear triad. So whatever happened to me, I experienced fear, And so essentially what the 5 does is we get into this mechanism of, hey, I'm not sure what's coming next, so I'm going to hoard my energy. I'm going to get all the knowledge, and because if I had only known, I would have been able to prevent that pain. So I'm going to be prepared for the next one.
Yeah.
I always say Batman is actually a Enneagram 5 because Batman is prepared for every eventuality. He's the investigator. He sits in the darkness and he observes, and that's me. Yeah, but so the 5, the 6, and the 7 are the fear triad. The 6s basically get paranoid, and the 7s essentially deal with their fear by ignoring it and trying to experience everything.
Man, that's a good summation, and I think that really gets to the heart of and captures the Enneagram, and it really helping us understand our attachment styles, and how we respond, because that really is, I think, the crux of, for all of us, helping us understand how to process our emotions and our grief, and really just to lament. I think as I have observed, watched the news, and just engage in my own process of grief and loss, I think I realize that I need to create more space to lament. And I know that's challenging, that it's a challenge that I'm not only facing myself, but also other people are as well, because of, just the current pace of life. Our responsibilities don't stop because we're in the middle of a pandemic. And but what I know that happens is, just over time, we collect trauma, or I said, that we acquire cumulative trauma. And I'm not talking about, which I think is, you can speak into this, Garland, that oftentimes, I don't want to minimize, especially as a counselor, the trauma that we face, but oftentimes we only consider, and I said this last week, kind of our big T traumas, if you will, like physical or sexual abuse, but oftentimes what goes unnoticed and unaddressed are kind of the little T traumas, these developmental traumas, or traumas that happen as a result of a distressing life experience that we had, especially early in life, that we were not, at that moment, we did not have the mental or emotional resources to really discern or have the right perspective to even process it.
Yeah, that's good.
Don't have the mental bandwidth, understanding about the world, about ourselves, about God, for that matter, to really make sense of what's going on. And to a degree, that puts us at a disadvantage, because our minds are always making meaning of our experiences,
Right.
whether we know them or not. And we just can't stop our mind from drawing an incorrect conclusion from an experience that we have, if we don't have the resources to do that.
Interestingly, my definition, or one of the definitions I use for spirituality, is meaning making. So that meaning making activity is the definition of spirituality. There are the activities you engage in that help you create more meaning, or maybe change your meaning, or become really important. So diving a little bit into my trauma story, so I lived in a dysfunctional household, and quite frankly, so I have a brother and a sister. My sister's 4 years older than I am. My brother's 2 years older than I am. So my sister was abused. My brother was abused. I did not experience abuse, at least not physical or sexual abuse. They did. And so I grew up thinking, I don't have trauma because I didn't go through what they did. And it wasn't until actually I was in seminary having a conversation with someone who they were an intelligence officer dealing with PTSD, and we had some conversations about that. And what they were explaining was that even though they had never fired their rifle, even though they never had a bullet whizzed by them, they experienced some PTSD.
Wow.
And what was interesting for me is as they began to talk about their symptoms, I was mentally going, well, I do that. Well, I do that. Well, I do that. I do that. Yeah. And so I'm matching all these things, and I'm like, oh, I think I have PTSD.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
I can laugh about it now,
Yeah.
and I probably a lot of us. So like a lot of us who've experienced race-related trauma, we laugh about it, especially when we're among people who see it from a perspective. We laugh about it, but part of it's that's just a way of relieving the tension. Otherwise, you're crying all the time. But interestingly enough, I think there's a place and a time for the tears. And that's what, with me and my back pain, what I realized is even though I had processed some of the anger that I was feeling, I had not processed all of the anger that I was feeling. And so it went somewhere. And for me, it went in my lower back.
Yeah.
That's where it went. And so what I'm learning and have learned, and I'm observing both in terms of walking through my own trauma journey and helping others walk through their journey, is I'm learning if you're in the head triad, which is the fear triad. So if you're at 5, 6, and 7, what I'm experiencing and what I'm observing is we need to spend some time thinking it through because we live in our head so much.
Yeah.
So got to give yourself space to process and to kind of mentally defrag your hard drive. You've got to resort your folders.
Yeah.
And you've got to reattach the emotions, because a lot in that triad you try to separate the emotions, and so you've got to spend some time putting those emotions back together with the event and the thought. And that's what I had to do. Was really kind of do a deep dive, and Desiree is right, that emotion feeling wheel has been a helpful tool for me to think about, well, I'm angry, what exactly I'm angry about. And when I revisited that anger, what it really came down to was I felt like there was no justice, that nobody was paying for what I perceived as these racial things that were going on. People were getting away with it. Nobody was paying for it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until somebody pointed out to me and they said, Garland, you're angry, but you have to remember God's probably just as angry, even more angry than you are about this. Yeah. It wasn't until I got to there that I began to come out of the spiral. There's still a lot of work. And there's still processing. I'd say I'm probably about 95% okay. There's still a 5% hanging around there. But that was part of that climbing out of the hole. And I'll say this, and then I know you got something to say. It feels like you're trapped in a spiral. But one of the things I heard this about addiction is that if you turn a spiral on the side, it's actually a spiral staircase going up. So if you're looking at it from the top down, it looks like you're walking in a circle. The reality is you're circling up out of it.
Wow.
And so even though it feels like, man, I keep going through the same thing over and over and over again. It's like, no, you might just be having to turn the wheel several times before you can fully get out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. This is, and oftentimes that I think that's probably the challenge of processing our grief, is that we don't oftentimes see the benefit of processing our emotions. We don't see the benefit or fruit of it, if you will, till later on down the road. So it seems as if in the moment that it's not having a significant impact on us by processing our emotions. And so this kind of raises this question of really, what space do we have? Are we being intentional about the space that we're creating to intentionally reflect and to lament our losses? It has been, as I have had to do the work of connecting with my anger, and I think I would share the sentiment that, and when you said it, it really helped me even process a little bit more of my own kind of anger and grief around this whole situation, especially with George Floyd and just the myriad of cases that we've had, really as an uptick since Trayvon Martin.
Right.
That somebody feeling like somebody, that there's a person responsible for this, and I don't see a person being brought to justice. And then, which is why sometimes I have to uh, narrow what I consume, is seeing people automatically jump to villainize the person, or come up with some um, excuse or reason why this person, to me, that their killing was justified.
Mm-hmm.
And
as if a prior, just to
yes,
hint at something, as if a prior event or a prior stint in jail is justification for a present killing.
correct. And so, and then having to almost say convince people to empathize with the victim. And this is where I was saying, having a conversation with a group of guys, and because we were part of this group, and someone had said something within the group, dear brother, and these are, these believers, but a white brother had, made some comments that were kind of short, I won't say kind of short-sighted as it relates to the documentary by Ava DuVernay on the 13th Amendment, and how it was propaganda filled and just inaccurate, and some other things. And so the thing that I said to my friend as we were discussing it is, one of the things that occurred to me is, in listening to him comment or make those comments, it almost, for me, in some degree, kind of validated what we've already been saying before, in that you're not empathizing with our experience, but also you don't have a full understanding of what is going on, that these things are layered. The comment that he made was about that a lot of what we see is a result of the lack of two-parent households.
Right.
And this just got me dizzy, because for me,
because as if George Floyd not having a parent is the reason why he was killed.
Yeah. And this is just across the board. And so just making this sweeping judgment about people, especially in the Black community, but not understanding how, and this is why I said systemic injustices continue to exist, because he didn't have an understanding of other systems that go in place to make sure the family unit is broken down. Just giving them one example, just from Willie Lynch. One of the things that he would often do, because he understood the importance of a male in the family system, is that he would bring the family together, including the father. He would have the father.
So you're talking about during slavery time?
Yes, during slavery time. And he would have the father attached to two sides of two horses, and have them pretty much pull the father apart, and just how he understood how that would break their dependence on the father figure, the importance of the father figure in that family unit. And so when and this is like happening in slavery, and some of those similar, I won't say not that specific practice, but there are ways in which systems have did the same type of sentiment to really break down the family unit. And so, not to go into a whole
right, because that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah. And so
we not Lament, and I realize we probably haven't defined it. And so I think a very simple understanding of Lament is it's a passionate expression of grief.
Yeah.
Meaning you've got to let yourself go there, whatever there looks like, in connection to the painful event. So for my, again, so for me, that's an intellectual act in which I have to kind of explore and reattach what I perceive to what I'm feeling. Probably, I suspect, for you folks in that gut triad, you almost have to reenact the moment and to re-express it in the moment. Because I would imagine for you having that conversation with your friend about 13th, I would imagine, knowing you probably had to hold back. But there's a version of that conversation where you just wanted to grab him and shake him and shout.
Yes. I think that's and thank you, Desiree, for saying that. I often feel, especially in conversations like this, that I don't have the emotional energy to explain to you all of what has went on to go into making sure systemic racism still exists.
Well, and can I shouldn't have to have the emotional energy, because you should be empathetic enough to see me as a brother.
There you go, Garland.
To be able to sit with me in this, even if you don't fully understand it. And sometimes you have to let that passion out and that frustration out. And that's what I would say, especially for my 2s, 3s, and 4s, is sometimes you just have to let the emotion out. I find some of the meaning-making activities that I see 2, 3s, and 4s engage in is like the journaling. I found that group tends to really find that useful. Whereas I find the 8, 9s, and 1s, the writing a letter to that person, even if you never send it, typically, that seems to be helpful. And I love what Lanita said. Don't be Job's friends. We have a mutual professor in seminary, Dr. Waters. Bless his heart, he's with the Lord now. But he said Job's friends were doing all right up until the moment that they opened their mouths.
That's so. I think that's. I mean, it's just like, she said that really correctly. You don't want Job friends. And that was, the space. And what was unique about our conversation, because we all got together because we're like, we don't want to have this conversation through a group chat. So we got together in person to have this conversation. And what came out of that is really the brothers expressing just how naive they may have been to the plight of what's really going on. And one of the other brothers had a chance to share his experience. He's a Black brother, and he shared his experience. And what occurred out of that, at the end of that, was something significant, because he said for the first time, he's 38 years old, and sharing very vulnerably in that environment, and having people just sit with him in his grief, in his lament. What he said at the end was, for the first time as a Black man, I am feeling like I have been seen by you as a white brother. And it's almost like immediately they got that. Like, sometimes we don't realize that simply just being seen means so much. And that because we're all wired for love and belonging, and we all want to be known.
James, you have, I can't remember if you and I talked about this, but so the day after, and in the couple of days after George Floyd died, it's hard for me to count the number of Black men who personally called me, many of them in tears. These are grown men. I am 40, I think 43 or 44 years old. And people my age are calling me in tears. Some of them having to go out in the middle of this One of my friends talked about having to pull down his mask in the middle of this quarantine to demonstrate that he was not of a threat, so
Wow.
that people would let him do his job.
Man.
And I mean, there's not a whole lot I could say, because I mean, what's interesting about that is in these conversations, thank you, I'm 44. In these conversations, we didn't even have to explain fully all that we were going through, because as Black men, we've all been through it. So we knew, like, I could half share my stories and he could half share his stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I understood exactly what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Because we'd all been through it in some version or another. Even if I hadn't been through that exact thing that he was going through.
This is a comment I want you, another quote I was reading, just Eugene Peterson work. He says, let me bring this up. I want to get your response to this. He said, pain isn't the worst thing. Death isn't the worst thing. The worst thing is failing to deal with reality and becoming disconnected from what is actual. What I do with my grief actually affects the way that I handle my grief. And I thought that was so profound, and really kind of helping underscore like our need to process our grief. And like I said, I've been encouraged, like you said, what you think you said was so important, is that these brothers were calling, you could share half of your conversation and he could share half, but you guys the empathy was there, and that empathy opened up your soul, if you will, to be able to grieve and to sit in that. I'll have you respond to that comment.
Peterson is so wise, and I mean, so useful. Like, just about anything he writes is gold, quite frankly. Yeah, it's so true. And in fact, so I think what the Enneagram does is it's describing all the mechanisms we do to avoid having to deal with the grief.
Yeah.
And it gives you, and it shows you the pathway that probably you should take to get back to that grief so that you can process it. In a different context, my wife and I teach a class called Biblical Coaching, and we walk through Lament. And we often describe Lament is you have to walk through the valley in order to get to the mountain.
Yeah.
You have to walk through that valley of grief, that valley of pain, before you can get to that mountain of faith.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, if you live, as most people are probably watching this, they probably live in the United States of America or are part of Westernized Christianity. Uh-huh. And so we tend to have a triumph narrative. So we do things like we read the story of David and Goliath as a little guy triumphing over the big. I think there's actually more going on to that. I think it's actually the story of God triumphing over evil. And David happens to be a tool in that. Yeah. But so we always see that as hey, we're overcoming, we're powerful, we're winners. And that's how we process the Bible. When in fact, I think there's a lot more in the Bible where it's just really a matter of this sucks and the world is broken, and one day things will be better, but right now it's not.
Look, the book of Psalms is over 2/3, of lamentations of David lamenting his experience. And I've always found that obviously unique, that God calls him a man after his own heart. And I think a part of that is just David's ability to embrace all of life and to embrace reality and to bring that before God. I think that's the next question I was going to ask you. What are some practical ways that people can lament? And one of the ones that I just that came to my top of my mind is just bringing all of your emotions, really letting your emotions and expressing your emotions be an entry point into a conversation with God.
It's interesting. When I was young, before I had all my fancy book learning, I went to the seminary. When I was at the height of my frustrations and grief in the midst of a dysfunctional family, brought me comfort was Ecclesiastes. I would read Ecclesiastes and I would feel better. I never understood why until I went to seminary and I learned about lament, and I was like, oh, that's what I was doing. Because I was lamenting in my own way. As I was walking through that journey that the writer is going through, saying all is vanity, and he's looking at the world and kind of coming to the conclusion of what's really important. But he walks through a lot of bad stuff in order to get to that part. And that's what I was doing. So I think sometimes either writing out or speaking out or acting out or thinking out the complaint, saying, God, this is terrible and I'm unhappy and I'm frustrated and I'm angry and this is why, and letting the raw emotions come out.
Yes.
Rather than running to the faith moment. I think sometimes we have this habit of if I express that I'm frustrated, then that demonstrates a lack of faith. No, it's actually demonstrating faith by expressing your frustration to the only entity that can change it.
Yes.
Yeah, and so, correct. Vulnerability is so key. I think you have to be honest with yourself. Whether you express it to somebody else is a different thing. I think there are some people who need to express it to some, and I think do that. But I think you have to start with being honest with yourself and being honest before God. One of my favorite books is Till We Have Faces. And part of what's so powerful to me about that book is the main character is very raw about what they're feeling. And so I think you've got to sit in the emotion and the frustration. Even if you're in the intellectual side like me, my emotions are not the first thing that come to mind. So I think you've got to be able to do that. I think you find the people and the places and that you can do that with. Quite frankly, not everybody's going to be safe to lament with.
Desiree is tracking with us tonight.
And don't assume that your spouse is that person. It's not that your spouse isn't safe, but that they might be carrying some things that you didn't. I was having this conversation with my wife, and I've had this conversation with a couple of other people. I realized that Black women in particular are carrying something and have been carrying something that no one else is carrying. Because I think Black women are experiencing the normal race things that every person of color experiences. But Black women have the added stack of when I walk out the door to go to a 9 o'clock video shooting in the evening, my wife's holding her breath, hoping that I don't get pulled over by the police. And that they don't think that I'm up to no good. And that's not something that I have to carry. When she drops my son off at school, she's thinking, have I taught him enough about how to interact so that if someone decides that he's doing something, will he respond in a way that will get him back safely home? And yeah, I'm processing that as a father, but as a mother, she's processing it on a different level. And I just realized that Black women are carrying that in a way that I, as a Black man, am not. And I told her that. I said, look, I see that you're carrying something that I'm not, and I just need you to know that I understand that to the degree that I have the ability to understand that.
Yeah, my wife had that experience actually just recently. I obviously do my broadcast at my office for Wellness Wednesdays, and I had ended our segment only probably 4 weeks. This may have been like the second week after George Floyd, and I had got off the call, off the video, and I was cleaning up, straighten my office up before I left, and told her I would be on my way. And I live maybe about 15 minutes from my office, and so I lost track of time, and it had been about 30 minutes or so. So when I get on the road and I'm going home, it's way past. It's been at least 45 minutes, and she calls me, and she's like, "Where are you?" And I'm like, "I'm down the road." And she said, "You need to let me know." I was like, "Yeah, I did call you." And then it hit me like, yeah, but I called her, told her that 30 minutes ago, almost 40 minutes ago. And she knows that I only we only stay about 15 minutes. So that's a whole 30-minute gap that she's thinking, he hasn't contacted me, what's going on? And so I think you're absolutely right in that. And so I think we've highlighted a couple of good ways that people can create space for a lament. I think one of those that we've already articulated is finding a safe space to do that with the people that you trust that are in your community. As I look at the protesting, I see for a lot of people that protesting is a form of lament. It is a form of lament, and that's kind of another thing that bothered me is that to see people attack protesters. Now, obviously, I think there are some people that have slid in, and we saw that in the news, to try to take advantage of this moment of protesting for their own personal gain. But people who don't
there might be actually some other counter agents. I would encourage some of you to Google COINTELPRO, one word, COINTELPRO. I'm just going to leave it there.
Okay,
Google that.
I'll do that. And so we need to find a safe space to do that. We need to be intentional about the space that we create. I think our community is going to be really important. Really important, engaging community, checking in on people and asking them just not how are you doing, but how are you feeling, and giving them space to explore their emotions with you and you empathize with them. And doing this, hopefully, if you can do this 2 to 3 times every week, I suggest daily. They have friends that I talk with that I do this regularly because it keeps me connected to my emotions, and which I think we all need to stay connected to because I think I said this previous episode, that unprocessed emotions don't die. They just leak into other areas of our life. And so we need to create space to do that. And
yeah, I usually and you've heard me ask you this question, I'll usually call and say, hey, how's your soul today?
Yeah.
How's your soul doing?
Mm-hmm.
Which I learned that from someone else because I think sometimes it's not just what your emotions are, but what's your soul doing?
Yeah.
I also, so there's a book, the Spiritual Disciplines Handbook. So I think if you're wanting to engage in some of those meaning-making activities where you can really start to emotionally chew on some of these events and go through activities that will help you do that. The Spiritual Disciplines Handbook, I think, is a good handbook for a number of different activities that you can engage in that tap into your spirituality and your connection, your relationship with God, to help you process some of those. And it's more than I can mention. That's why I'm like, Spiritual Disciplines Handbook, Adele Calhoun is the author.
Perfect. And then especially for those who are people of color who are engaging in this time, I think, and I'll say this, that, your presence and your life matters. And so I think one of the questions that I've been asking myself, and that I think that I was asking myself is, what is my individual responsibility and how God wants me to respond to what is currently going on, just not with COVID, but with this pandemic. And some of us are already actively doing things to help in ending systemic racism, but praying about how we can have a personal responsibility in that, because obviously I think it's a both and solution, and that yes, our white brothers and sisters have to be engaged enough to learn and understand the plight. And I think what can be, and this is why I think processing and lamenting is really important, because if you don't do that in a healthy way, you can end up burning bridges and connections that would help a lot of people because you haven't processed your own grief. And so when you're sitting with somebody who is of the other persuasion, some things may be said and you might get triggered, and you might have a good reason to get triggered, but how you respond when you get triggered is as important as well. And so doing your own grief lament work is important, because really once we do that, and I think this speaks to really the totality of what can come from our lamenting and grief, is that often we find this in scriptures that on the other side of us doing our own grief work and lamenting comes a new pathway, a new opportunity, as I said before in my post, a renewed sense of calling. But we don't get to that end, as you said, Garland, unless we actually go through the valley of lamenting and grief. And so, man, I'm really glad that you joined me with this conversation tonight. Any other last comments?
Well, I noticed Desiree brought up a really good question. If you'll let
me. I missed her. Yes, go ahead and comment on that. She said,
so this numbing out is a really important thing because it's a double-edged sword. Let's talk about.
Thank you, Desiree, for asking this question as well.
Yes, it's a beautiful question. So sometimes things are just too intense, and so your psyche, your brain will just shut your emotions off because it's just not enough, or it's too much for you to deal with in the moment. Quite frankly, with the trauma that I lived through, I realized that there was just a large part of my emotions growing up that were just shut off because it was just too intense. And that was a healthy survival mechanism that allows me to sit here with some level of sanity because I just, at 15, 16, 10 years old, I wasn't prepared emotionally to deal with some of the stuff that I was experiencing at the time. And so it's beautiful that God designed you in such a way that your mind has the ability to protect itself.
Yes.
And to put up walls.
Mm-hmm.
When you leave those walls up for too long, that's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I'm going to say, I think it's healthy sometimes to just walk away. Get off Facebook. Just don't reply. Don't respond. Turn off the post. Mm-hmm. Walk away. Mm-hmm. But I think if you're in a situation where you're finding that you're damaging and permanently cutting off too many of your relationships, some people don't need to be in your life anymore. But I think there's a point where you're cutting off too many people when you're starting to isolate. That becomes a problem.
Yeah.
So there's this tension that you have to navigate of understanding when you need to re-engage, but when you need to walk away. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it is healthy to go play a video game, go paint, go bake, go whatever it is that you do to kind of numb out and to zen out so that you don't have to sit in that. You want to find the space where you can healthfully re-engage. And that might mean even particularly for some of this racial trauma that a lot of us have been suppressing for so long, you might need to get professional help to start processing it.
Yeah.
And there's no shame.
Yeah, no shame at all. James Perkins got help. You'll see, let me actually put that up now. This is one of the things, like I said, I love doing. It's helping people process their pain and their experiences. So this may be a good, and I apologize, I put the wrong one up. That was JELP, not help. And so, one of the things that I was saying I want to add to that is, and you kind of piggyback, if you will, on this idea of putting the walls up, because that, like you said, that's our brain's way of protecting itself, and because it is a survival mechanism. And so what happens, like you said, if you keep it up for too long, it's almost this aspect of diminishing returns. It helps you to survive, to a certain extent, but it doesn't help you to thrive. And
Yeah.
really, this is an instructive question just for not numbing out, but for you asking yourself also um, about other strategies in your life that you've used to help you emotionally move forward. Is asking yourself the question: are the ways that I have been using, the strategies that I've been using to maintain my sense of wellness, all those things currently serving me to the fullest? And if they are not, you may need to investigate on replacing some of those strategies in order to help you thrive, because we can all survive to a certain extent,
Right.
but that's just the basic. So we just don't want to survive, we want to thrive. And then the other thing I would say about numbing out is when we try not to experience some of the uncomfortable emotions, what we really do is short circuit the positive ones as well. So we don't have the capacity to just shut off certain emotions. When we shut certain ones down, we also short circuit joy. And so if and this is why, like I said, it's so important, as I say, to feel your feelings, because if you don't feel them, you don't engage with them, um, and you try to numb them out, you really short circuit yourself from experiencing the other positive emotions, or if we could say that, positive emotions as well. Any other comments that you want to add, Garland?
No, I just want to piggyback off of that and say, yeah, I think when I look back over my trauma journey, and it's an ongoing trajectory, um, there's growing in trauma and then there's growing through trauma.
Yeah.
So sometimes the trauma is ongoing and there's growth, and and you're learning how to grow in the midst of the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's what happens beyond the trauma, and there's also things that you're doing there. So it's, I mean, what were the habits? What were the habits and the patterns that protected you? Maybe you need to stop those and develop new habits and patterns of protection. And then what are the habits and patterns that, once you're beyond the moment, that you need to pick up to continue to move forward?
Yeah.
If living beings are constantly growing, so we have to be constantly in a posture of learning and growing, adapting, so that we can continue on this trajectory.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Of growth.
Perfect. Man, well, thank you so very much. For those who have been attending with us, we thank you for your time. I have a free gift for you if you want to check out this link below, JamesPerkins.help wellness gift. One of the things I did is I put together kind of 5 mindset practices and walk you through how to integrate those, if you will, into your daily life, because we really need practices to help us cultivate our own sense of mental and emotional wellness. And the reason I started Wellness Wednesdays was really to give people an opportunity, give them tools and strategies to help them understand that our thoughts and emotions have a profound impact on our decision making, on our emotional well-being, and our decisions inevitably lead us to destiny, to us being able to realize our potential. So I want to offer you that free gift. And then for a limited time, what I did open up recently are wellness checkup sessions. So they're at a discounted rate. They're not the full rate of, what I do as professional therapy, but it does give you an opportunity to have a checkup with me, to process life, because we all need a space to do that. We all need a space to do that. And so you could, again, check out JamesPerkins.help, and you'll see at the top where it just says counseling and coaching, and you'll see the opportunity there for you to schedule a time for us just to do a wellness checkup. As I say, every therapist needs a therapist, but I think we all need professional help, and that's like no joke at all. And so even if you listen to this by replay, let us know again where you're chiming in from. Mary, thank you so very much. Lauren, Desiree, thank you guys for engaging in our conversation tonight. And thank you, Garland, again, man. I love you, brother.
Love you too, man. I enjoy every time we get together.
Perfect. Yep. So go schedule your wellness checkup today, and we look forward to seeing you on next week. Everybody have a great week. Bye-bye.